the way that the judges really took to themselves this power is they have started screaming that they have the right of judicial review. Now, judicial review is the right for the court to be the final authority on whatever happens. The court takes that back to an 1803 Supreme Court decision called Marbury versus Madison. That is the first occasion in American history where the court reviewed the action of another branch. And what had happened, now this is 1803 when this occurs, Marbury-Madison. All the law books, all the textbooks say this is the origin of judicial review, and this is what the judges and courts rely on as being the source of their power. Let's go back to that little historical incident. You're coming at the end of the election of John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson, that 1800-1801 presidential election. In that election, you have two political parties, the Federalist, John Adams, the Anti-Federalist, Thomas Jefferson. The people overwhelmingly choose the Anti-Federalist. Not only is Thomas Jefferson elected president over John Adams, but the people elected an Anti-Federalist House and they elected an Anti-Federalist Senate. So the people have weighed in. We don't want the Federalist Party, we want the Anti-Federalist Party from top to bottom. Well, you now have a lame duck president, you now have a lame duck House and Senate. They decide we're going to make sure that this nation stays Federalist and not Anti-Federalist. So they pass a bill that authorizes 16 federal judgeships, and they're going to fill those 16 judgeships with Federalist judges, and that way they can keep federalism in the government as opposed to anti-federalism. So John Adams signs that bill. He gives those positions to the Secretary of State, who has to deliver the commissions to these guys who have been named to be judged. They also passed a bill to appoint a number of judges in Washington, D.C. So he gives it to a Secretary of State. Secretary of State forgot to deliver the commissions. They didn't go to those D.C. judges. So when the new administration comes in, Thomas Jefferson, his Secretary of State is James Madison. James Madison finds these D.C. judicial appointments on his desk that they were not delivered to the previous nominees. So he says, well, I'm sure not delivering those guys. No, we don't want Federalist judges on the court. So Madison says, I'm not delivering them. Well, one of the judges who had been confirmed by the Senate but didn't get his commission because the Secretary of State forgot to deliver it was a guy named Marbury. And he's the one who sued. He said, hey, I got confirmed by the Senate. I get the commission. It's been technically approved. I just don't have it in hand. So he takes it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the Chief Justice at that time is John Marshall. And the court is to decide whether this guy should have gotten his commission. Well, the court issued a ruling that said, yeah, that commission should go to him. He was given that judgeship. He should receive it. That was the ruling of the court. And that's what the court uses to say, hey, this is the first time the Supreme Court got involved in telling another branch what to do, and that's the basis. We need to say, time out just a minute. You remember that Secretary of State for John Adams who forgot to deliver the commissions? Yes. Who was his Secretary of State? It was John Marshall. John Marshall forgot to deliver them. Well, John Adams quickly appoints John Marshall over here to be Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So the question in front of John Marshall is, you remember those commissions you forgot to deliver? Should you have delivered them? You know, today we say, time out, conflict. We have a conflict of interest here. This is a bad ethical problem. You can't rule on what you should have done back then. So here he is cleaning up his own mess that he made and saying, I rule that I should have given those to him, so you go ahead and give them to the judges in place of me. At that time, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, President and Secretary of State, went through the roof. They said this is a complete perversion of law for the court to attempt to tell another branch what to do.
Oh, come on.
Jefferson ignored it. James Madison ignored the ruling of the court, paid no attention to it whatsoever. And by the way, that was a practice of the presidents for over 100 years. You see, if you move forward to Abraham Lincoln, the Supreme Court had ruled in the Dred Scott decision and said, you can't end slavery. You can't end it in federal territories. Blacks are property, they're not people. And Abraham Lincoln said, phew, at least it was just the Supreme Court that said that. I don't have to follow it. So Abraham Lincoln goes in and does everything the Supreme Court told him he could not do. You see, each of the branches were independent. One branch couldn't run the other two branches.